Questions? Yeah.
Testing.
Okay.
Hey, so I have two questions. So one is, Bo, in the video, it seemed like when y'all were doing like a slight debrief of kind of what were the outcomes of the work you had done, Bo said that this was a step, and that this was a part of it. And so for each of you, what do you think is a next step that young people should be taking, that young revolutionaries should be taking? And then the other question I had was, by majority, did you see that black political prisoners were getting put away for longer terms than white political prisoners? And also if there was a gender difference too, like if what women and men were also serving.
The question of next steps is an interesting one, and I think it's one that is not something for me to answer, because I'm 67 years old and don't have that much time on the planet left, but it's something that younger people who are leading the movement really need to figure out. Conditions are very different now than they were when we went underground. There's a lot that has to be taken into account, and you need to be asking the younger leaders, and the younger leaders need to lead. I really liked the thing that I liked about the brigade was that we were Marxist-Leninist and anarchist and dykes and straight and black and white, and I think that was very unusual, and I would like to see that replicated.
I thought that was going to be the last question asked, not the first one. And if I had any answers, I would be doing them as well. But for those who could see the endless war that U.S. imperialism is engaged in is about to get more serious. And Lenin had something he called revolutionary defeatism. And that means when war comes, that our job as revolutionaries is to struggle for the demise of our own ruling class. Of course, anyone who does that during wartime is going to be called a traitor at best, and be subject to all kinds of things. Well, I know nobody here is going to be taking that seriously, or, you know, because we're all too comfortable, I guess. But one thing that can be done, this is not a socialist demand, but a bourgeois democratic demand, and that is the demand to end slavery, to modify the 13th Amendment so as slavery will no longer exist. Inside the nation's prisons, we have millions of disenfranchised slaves that, if that rug is pulled out from under the system, prisoners have the right to vote. The entire nature of imprisonment will suddenly, it'll modify everything. It'll be completely different in that field. Now, what we're doing is starting a newsletter called the Kite. All of us have a lot of newsletter experience, and what the Kite I can't remember. I say this 100 times a day, but I don't really. Harriet Tubman, there we go, said, "I freed 1,000 slaves. I could have freed another 1,000 if only they'd known they were slaves." And that's the problem we have in our prisons today. And so the purpose of the Kite newsletter is to focus on that aspect of imprisonment, to try and raise the consciousness of prisoners to the point that at least some of them understand that they are slaves and develop a willingness to start peacefully working towards transforming that. Thank you.
Yeah, on the issue of race, I started getting involved in the prison movement in about 1969. I helped found a Black Panther party inside a prison. It was the first one that was founded. That was the beginning of my involvement in activism. When I got out of prison, I continued with that work. But by continuing the work, I'm talking about the prison movement. Here in Seattle, we founded what we call the convention. It's just dealing with prisoners and prisoners' rights. Okay, and I see a lot of people out here who were involved in that at that time. I see some who were involved with Brigade, by the way, in the audience too. We won't talk about that. There are people who are involved that you'll never see their faces, some Native American, some black women, and there's women in the brigade that I don't even know their names, and they were outnumbered, who were sitting here. They helped struggle with brigade, inside of the brigade, underground, and we don't have to bring up their names. What I'm trying to get across is that there's a lot of community support, and they don't know where to start. There's a lot of people supported us when we did conventions. We did many conventions here in Seattle, in El Centro de la Raza, down at what they call the Polish Hall, which now is Washington Hall, at Langston Hughes. All these people, they gathered here to give us support and support prisoners. We're asking for support of the Kite. The Kite, the word Kite is a prison word. In prison, it started off originally as sending notes from one prisoner to another. But it evolved into a thing where if you needed a request to the hospital or the warden or something, you would send them a kite. That's where we get the name Kite in this thing right now. We're trying to talk to prisoners in the same language that they know. These are prisoners inside and ex-prisoners outside. There's no such thing as an ex-convict. All my sentences, in a sense, have expired. But I have over 210 years, 2 life sentences, another 10 on top of that. And I shouldn't be on the streets, really. I should be. Well, I shouldn't be. According to the sentences, I shouldn't be here. And it's the same way with the people sitting here. They have sentences, and it continues because when we ask for a job, have you ever been convicted? If we're trying to get married a long time ago, I don't know if it's now, but you have to say whether you are convicted, you have to bring your wife or your spouse before the parole officer. There's numerous, you can't buy a firearm, which an ex-convict, if he wants a firearm, will get a firearm. But anyways, it has got nothing to do with the law. But there's about 15 different laws in this state alone that make an ex-convict excluded from some of the privileges or rights that you have. You want to vote, sometimes you have to wait 3 years or more before you get that right to vote. And that's a ridiculous thing. Voting is just a flip of a coin. We know that. We're going to try to talk to prisoners in the language that they understand. So we're not talking above their heads. I mean, we believe in class consciousness. That's a long way to go to get prisoners to believe this. But that's one of the things we're going to struggle to do, is they belong to a class that is going to be continually oppressed from the time they've gone to prison when they get out, and it will continue. It'll hurt their families, and it'll hurt their friends, it'll hurt them as well. Being a convict is not an ex-convict once you get out. You're a convict for the rest of your life.
Why don't you all speak on the Free Mark Cook Committee as far as addressing the question of the differences in sentencing, as far as what I've heard from you, Ed, about Mark being the only black prisoner in the brigade left in prison, and the organizing around that?
I'll touch on that. First of all, I knew I should be the last one out because I've known the statistics when I first went into prison that black prisoners serve longer terms than white prisoners. And I did 24 years. They didn't, Ed, I don't know how many you did about, Ed did 18, and he struggled to get me out. I mean, he over-struggled. Sometimes I had to slow him down. He got a little vicious out there with some of his flyers and stuff with blood dripping off the barrels of guns and things. I said, no. Let me get me out. I didn't think I was coming out anyways. But due to Ed and Mark Cook Defense Committee, they did get me out. But there is a big difference between, you know, white prisoners and black prisoners. I see, excuse me, a lot of white bread here, so to speak. And I appreciate that too. But there are people, in fact, tomorrow I have to go to a Black Panther meeting down there at Washington Hall, and we're doing a movie there, not in Washington Hall. This is a movie out on 45th, a little theater right up the hill for 45th.
The Neptune.
Yeah, Neptune, okay.
On a totally different subject, I just want to mention that Ed has this book called Lumpen that you can get in the lobby if you want, or I guess you can order it through the press, but I don't remember who the press is. Anyway, it's an excellent, it's down Amazon? Okay, it's on Amazon, of course. But one of the reasons that it hit me that it's such an important book is because Ed started out lumpen and really hating and oppressing women, and he has this account of this in his early life that is totally honest, and I have never heard anything like that from another male. So I think it's worth reading for that, and then the change of his consciousness to becoming political too. So I'm just doing a little rah-rah for lumpen.